The Escape, the Gate, and the Fall. Outside of the invisible gates of Delphia stood Bannister Church. It had stood there for longer than anyone knew, and would likely remain that way. A snowmobile sat parked outside of it. The church, normally a dead place of rotting silence, was now hosting guests. Within its basement, locked away from prying eyes, sat the other half of Tobit's idol. It too came with a puzzle written in dawning. It would take a brilliant mind to solve it, one like Claire Noble's. However, if Claire herself was not available, she had two fill-ins who could solve the riddle just fine.
"Blast it, Janice. We're going to freeze to death before we figure this thing out," Christopher Allen snapped.
"We're almost there. We already loosened it. Stop complaining and help me figure out this last line," Batista scolded. Many plans had been changed from the time Claire Nobles boarded the plane from New York destined for New Orleans, one of which had been this. As Claire had explained to Pinkerton, there were more entries in the Triassic Journal than the think tank had actually read. At first, they would likely have read the entire thing, as that had been their duty. However, once the nightmares began, it became apparent that some things needed to be kept secret, even from the scientific world. The last chapter in Epor's journal was a detailed report of him following the primes into what would become Delphia. Epor had observed how they erected the idol, how it snapped into place on its pole by a series of puzzles, like a combination. He'd also seen that it came in two pieces, each one, in Epor's opinion anyway, equally vital to anchoring Delphia to Earth. The night before Claire, Lena, Derek, and Trevor left New Orleans for Delphia, once Claire knew for sure that the mission at hand was destroying the idol, she'd called Batista and Allens and instructed them of what to do. They would have to get to Antarctica somehow, and then find lodging at the Dakota Science Station, as it was the closest to Bannister Church. It was actually the appearance of the red star that enabled them to do so. Christopher Allens had put a call to Dr. Redbay and told him that Claire needed them at that particular science station as soon as possible. Redbay didn't know much about Allens or Batista, but he knew Claire had been missing. Allens assured him that getting to the Dakota was paramount to Claire's safety. Redbay had tried pressing for more answers, but Allens had held strong, promising the man full disclosure once their job was complete. From there it took the combined efforts of Allens, Batista, and Redbay, all using their school's full influence, to convince the researchers at the Dakota that these two scientists were vital in unraveling the mystery of the blood star, but could only do so from Antarctica. After several days of tense conversation, the arrangements had been made.
"I had to call in a lot of favors for this, so you better be telling the truth about Claire,"
Redbay told Allens on the day that he and Batista left for Antarctica. It was then that the little Japanese girl began to contact them. At first, Allens or Batista would wake up and simply think they had had a strange dream. They'd certainly had enough of those to where it had become the norm. However, when they began to compare the dreams, they realized that this was intentional. Claire was reaching out to them from Delphia through the little girl. In most of the dreams, the girl would simply tell them that Claire was safe, followed by, "It's not time yet." However, this last dream had been very different. Had Allens not dozed off into one of his frequent naps, he may have missed the cue. Luck was on their side, though, as he dozed off and met the little girl once more. "Dr. Allens, it's time. Go to the church. You know what to do. Claire will be doing her job here with me. Please, hurry." Soka had given him this urgent message, and as he awoke, he grabbed Janice Batista and they made their way out to Bannister Church.
"I still don't know why we just didn't smash this thing when we first got here. Now it's a big rush,"
Allens continued to complain. "Don't be ridiculous, Christopher. Had we meddled with this horrid thing before Claire took care of her task, they might have just come out here and repaired it or something. This all has to be together. Give the bastards no time to react." Allens smiled.
"Why, Janice, I do believe there is a little pepper left in you after all."
"Wait, Christopher, I think I have it!" Janice screamed, and gave the idol two deliberate twists. She applied upward pressure to the idol and was thrilled to see the pole rise up.
Whoa, what are those?"
Allens shouted. Looking below the base of the idol, the two scientists could see a large stockpile of glowing orbs. There was a hook attached to the base of the pole which fed down into the pile of orbs. "You don't think?" she asked.
"Those exploding orbs from Epor's story? Yes, I would wager that is exactly what those are. The damned thing is booby-trapped.
What do we do, Christopher? Janice Batista shouted. For the first time in Dr. Christopher Allen's long career in science, he did not have an answer. Claire and Derek, with Soka on his shoulders, continued to run through the streets of Delphia. They were accompanied by the few remaining unwashed who had not fallen in the raid. They believed they were home free when suddenly they saw a mob waiting for them. At least 20 men and women stood, barring their escape. They all held torches, and this reminded Derek far too much of his first frantic run from Delphia. What do we do? Claire asked. Go around them somehow? A side street, maybe? One of the unwashed came over. We have a contingency for this, he said, and removed a flare gun from his jacket. Get ready to hold your ears, the man shouted as the flare popped in the sky. The mob, clearly having seen enough, began to march towards them. That was when the streets were suddenly lit up with fiery explosions. The unwashed had planted boxes of dynamite in strategic locations, and now they were setting them off to clear a path of escape. Look! Derek shouted through ears that were still ringing. Coming towards them from the direction of the cathedral were several dozen faithful cultists, being led by Pinkerton himself. You two go. Get Soka and yourselves out of here. We'll slow them down, the man shouted. What about you and the other unwashed? Claire asked. We've been here too long. Been through too much with these bastards. We decided a long time ago that going home might never be an option. But watching this place burn, that is most certainly something we want to see. Good luck to you, Derek shouted. The mob that had formed in front of them was still rolling on the ground, taken by shock at the sudden explosions all around them. The unwashed split into two groups of about 8 men each. Half assaulted the mob that was still rolling on the ground and trying to regain themselves. The others ran straight towards Pinkerton and his men. Come on, we can make it, Claire shouted, and she and Derek ran through the scattered crowd towards the Mendez Gate. As they ran, they could hear more explosions behind them, as tactically hidden explosions slowed down the forces of Delphia. It wasn't until they reached the gate and found it locked that they began to feel fear once more. Batista and Allens continued to silently debate their next move. To remove the idol would be to set off the orbs. To fail to do so would be to condemn Claire and likely themselves as well. They may have stood there and stared at each other a while longer had a voice not spoken up, breaking their silence for them. I would stop right there if I were you two, a commanding female voice ordered. Batista and Allens looked up and saw a woman, bleeding badly from her right shoulder apparently, walking down the stair to the basement. She had lost a lot of blood and was starting to feel the part, but she knew that she still had enough gas in the tank to stop 2 middle-aged fucks from destroying the city of Delphia. You've lost a lot of blood, young woman. Are you okay? Batista asked. Oh, I'm pretty fucking far from okay, but if you're worried about my little wound, then I think you're missing the point here. With that comment, Tabitha drew a knife, preparing to take aim. What do you want? Who are you? Allens demanded, although he had no doubt that she was part of this cult of Tobit. I want you to step away from that idol. If you haven't noticed, it's rigged to blow. Then I want you to stand still so that I can kill you both. Think you can help me out with that? Neither scientist moved. They kept their hands firmly gripped around the idol. Okay then, stand there and die. It's all the same to me, Tabitha shouted as she raised the knife, ready to throw. As she raised her hand, knife at the ready, a gunshot suddenly rang out in the small basement, causing Janice to scream. The bullet struck Tabitha in her side. She dropped the knife and rolled down the stairs, landing at the bottom. Looking up through eyes filled with shock, she saw Gregory Leary standing at the top of the stairs, gun trained on her. I told you I'd get you, he gasped. The running he'd had to put in to catch up with Tabitha had reopened the wound on his stomach. He too was bleeding badly. Gregory, you shot me, Tabitha stated, as though she were surprised in the end that he would follow through with his threat. I paid you back for my brother, he said through short gasps. Batista and Allen shared a quick glance of concern and decided that it was indeed time to make a move. Wait! Gregory shouted to them. You're not stopping us from doing this, Allen shouted. No, you're right. This has to be done. Delphia is a disease on this planet. It must be removed.
I'll destroy the idol. You two get out of here. Go and catch up with Claire.
Can you lift in your state? Janice Batista asked. Gregory began walking over, holding his stomach.
I'd lift it on my deathbed if it meant an end to this.
As he stepped forward, intending to relieve Allens and Batista of their duty, he suddenly saw their eyes go wide.
Look out!
Allen screamed. Gregory had no time to register a response. He felt the knife dig into his shoulder, pull out, and then dig into the small of his back. Gregory fell backwards, landing in a sitting position against the wall. Falling next to him was Tabitha, blood dripping the knife in her hand.
Sorry, lover, but I don't like to lose,
she said through raspy breaths of her own.
We do it now,
Allens commanded.
I'm scared,
Batista told him.
Do not be afraid, my dear, for we are in this together.
Without another word between them, the two scientists lifted the idol from its base and smashed it on the floor beside them, reducing it to rubble. As this happened, the 100 or so orbs, once used by Epor's people as explosive weapons, began to glow, working their way towards detonation.
Christopher, will you accompany an old woman into the next world?
Batista asked.
My dear, it would be a duty and an honor,
he replied, taking her hand.
Well, it's about to get really hot in here. Hope you're satisfied, Greg.
Tabitha spoke weakly next to Gregory. However, in a strange moment of humanity, she held out her hand to him. Gregory, in his final moments, decided that he too could show compassion. Gregory Leary and Tabitha Shaw joined hands and shared a quick smile.
You're the only guy that ever won me over, Gregory,
she whispered, and in the next moment, as the orbs began to erupt in a massive explosive force, all those in the small church were removed from the face of the earth in one blinding ball of light. Claire and Derek suddenly felt heat and pressure building on the other side of the Mendez gate.
Get back!
Derek shouted, pulling Claire to the side. There was a massive explosion on the other side of the door, one they could feel more than actually see. The Mendez gate rocked on its hinges and fell open. Derek looked over and saw that Pinkerton and his faithful were closing in. There was no sign of the unwashed or any other form of resistance.
Let's go, now!
Claire shouted, and she and Derek threw open the Mendez gate and fled from Delphia, running out into the freezing chill of Antarctica. Much like Derek's first escape, no one followed. This time, though, Bannister Church was gone, and what he and Claire stepped out into was a massive crater. They pushed forward, looking back, seeing the faces of those sworn to live and die in Delphia once more staring out, their eyes filled with the same strange, jealous rage that Derek had seen last time.
Why aren't they chasing us?
Claire asked.
I don't think they can leave the city. They didn't chase me last time either,
Derek gasped, shifting Soka to his other shoulder.
Well, let's count our blessings and keep going. We have to try and get to a science station before we freeze to death out here,
Derek shouted. Suddenly, from behind them, explosions rang out. Claire and Derek turned in time to witness Delphia falling. The city was suddenly visible to them, a huge stone metropolis behind a large wall. They saw the enormous stone buildings collapsing by the dozens, saw the massive cathedral collapsing on itself as though it were imploding. Far to the rear of the city, they could see the tower, once the home of the Grand Magus and his most trusted, tipping over. Rubble flew, dust filled the sky, and then the light show began. Bursts of light and energy shot in every direction and in all colors. They seemed to be strange storms, isolated just within the stone walls. Derek saw a twister, like a tornado of energy, tear among the few rooftops that still stood. And then, without warning, the entire city began to disintegrate towards the sky, being carried upward in huge chunks. Claire and Derek began to run, but would look back every second or two and watch as more and more of Delphia was wiped from existence. They ran on for another 10 minutes, still looking back and catching glimpses of the city as it was pulled off the face of the earth. By the time they stopped to rest, they turned and watched the final pieces of Delphia vanish. A massive white energy built up around the remaining pieces of city. It built and built, humming and buzzing until Claire began to fear the explosion would take out the entire continent. Derek placed Soka between himself and Claire, and then turned, shielding them both with his back. The light roared and rose in enveloping the entire city from wall to wall. Then, in a massive flash, It all shot into the sky. When Derek and Claire finally felt it was safe to look, they saw where Delphia had stood. There was now massive scorched earth, the dimensions of the burn perfectly set to those of the fallen city. It was over.
"Okay, let's get out of here,"
Derek shouted. He and Claire began to briskly walk, hoping they would make it to help before freezing, when a sight of horror was suddenly blocking their path. Thaddeus Pinkerton stood in the snow, blocking them. He no longer looked like the proper Southern gentleman now. Now his suit was ragged and torn in many places. Blood oozed from his mouth. His eyes were wide and wild. He looked insane.
You meddling little shits," he screamed. "You've ruined it all. Eons and eons of work, undone by you. Do you really think you can stand against Hyraaq Tobit? Do you think so highly of yourselves?"
Derek handed Soka to Claire and stepped towards Pinkerton.
"Get out of our way. We've all had a rough day, but from the looks of you, I think I can knock your head off. Step aside, or I'll hurt you, man."
Pinkerton laughed, an ugly, ear-grating sound. "Is it fisticuffs that you want, Mr. Reynolds?"
"Oh my, no, we are far from that. I've come out here to show you the meaning of power, and power you shall know. The game ends here. It's time for you to meet the master."
Pinkerton held his arms up to the sky.
"Hyraaq Tobit, I summon you here. Come to my aid and smite these fools directly."
A massive roar filled the air. It was so loud and deep that it knocked Claire and Derek off of their feet. Pinkerton stood, laughing as the demon Tobit of Delphia came into existence beside him. Claire's brain could barely compute what she was seeing. A massive creature, taller than some buildings. A masculine body with the head of a goat. Its head had 3 burning red eyes, 2 in the normal places and 1 in the center of its forehead. Its horns extended another 10 feet from its head, long and twisting.
"Hyraaq Tobit, molder of our minds, king of the void, I beg you, destroy these 2 now,"
Pinkerton shouted, and Claire and Derek just had enough time to see the monster reaching towards them. They closed their eyes and waited. The Child Tobit of Delphia. Claire felt a hand on her shoulder and was sure that it was the hand of Tobit, though it felt too small. Derek felt the same. "Do not be afraid, for he means you no harm," a male voice spoke. It was soothing, like the voice of a father very much beloved by his children. Derek and Claire risked looking, and saw that they were now flanked on either side by what appeared to be a man and a woman, both dressed in, well, the only way she could describe it was regal attire. They even wore crowns. "Hyraaq, stop this at once. You're scaring these nice people," the male stated in a rather conversational tone, the same tone a father might use to gently correct a wayward child. "I believe we must have a conversation with Thaddeus Pinkerton, for it seems he's overstepped quite a bit," the woman stated. Her voice also carried that comforting quality, a loving mother's voice to be certain. Derek looked over and saw 2 things that amazed him. Tobit had shrunk. No longer was he a hulking beast, but now he was the size of a child, maybe just a little taller than Soka. He still had the head of a goat, but even that had more of a cartoonish quality to it now. Not really frightening, just strange. The other shocking development was that Pinkerton, apparently first named Thaddeus, had dropped to his hands and knees and was groveling in the snow before the 2 beings that had just appeared. This day was indeed full of wonder. "My name, well, it's a bit hard to say, so you can call me Queen if you like. I'm not really a queen, mind you, but it seems to be what humans like to see me as, so we shall keep it simple," the woman said in that same kindly, almost addictive voice. Derek saw that she was beautiful, with long blonde hair and eyes that were, well, a color he couldn't quite identify. She looked both young and old at the same time, as hard as that could be to explain. "You may call me King then, I suppose. Same explanation as my wife just gave, just easier that way," the male stated. He looked too handsome and stately, and Claire had to agree later with Derek that he somehow looked both young and old. "We're from the Council of Nod, and we have come here to intervene. It would seem that Thaddeus has committed a rather grave crime here today, haven't you?" King asked.
Forgive me, masters. Forgive me, my lord and lady. All I did for Hyraaq, for his growth."
Pinkerton sniveled, his face still buried in the snow. "Are you gods? Angels?" Derek struggled to ask. "Neither and both, I suppose," Queen replied. She walked over to Soka and caressed the girl's face. Soka began to wake up. "There we are, sweet girl. You've had a long day." "What's happening?" Soka asked in that tired way children do when they wake up and go right into talking. "So, who are you, exactly?" Claire was bold enough to ask. King began to explain. "As we said, we are the Council of Nod, or at least a small fraction of it. We are also the parents of Hyraaq over there, who I see has been quite naughty recently. We let him out of our sight for a few days, and look what he did." "A few days?" Derek asked, but he felt as though he understood. "Of course," Queen replied. "What seems like billions of years to you is really just a couple of days to us. We have a very different concept of time." "As I was saying," King began again, "we come from the Council of Nod. Our race, you see us as gods, but in reality, we are much like you, just a bit more advanced. We were born from the nothing that was the first universe. Lots of energy with nothing to do with itself. Just like your first beings being born from proteins and such, we were born from the pure, chaotic energy of the first universe. We created galaxies, planets, and star systems as art. Did you know that?" Queen asked. "Indeed, we were a species with no wars to fight, or conflicts to resolve, so we turned to art. And as we created, life began to form on our own creations, like painting a picture and watching the people in it suddenly start walking about and having conversations. For what you would call eons, we and the rest of our people were content to live this way. However, we too fell to the same follies that your race falls to quite often: greed and envy, jealousy and pride. As each of the little pieces of art began to develop, the artist would brag that their people, you mortals, were superior to the others. This started off innocently at first, just a creator taking pride in his or her work. But over time, some members of our people began to hedge their bets. They would gift their people with more intelligence, more aggression, more tools, or more lust. We were fools ourselves at first, you know." King nodded towards Queen to tell from there. "Yes, fools. We saw mortals as ours, our property. It was not until much later that we started to realize you were all just like us, just on a smaller scale. You had families and lives. You built and created, governed and built societies. We eventually deemed that it was no longer right for us to use you to compete with each other. So, the Council of Nod was formed." "Think of it as rules for gods," King stated, picking the story back up. "As you all became more advanced, we stepped back. There are many rules that we follow, and it would take us decades to explain them all, so I will tell you this. We, as beings, are not allowed to directly interfere with your lives. We can have some influence, sure, but no direct contact. To do so would defeat the purpose of you even living lives of your own." Claire, Derek, and Soka were enthralled in all of this. They hadn't noticed, but the temperature around them had been raised to perfect comfort levels. "Anyway, Hyraaq here is our child. He was one of the first of our kind to be born from two parents. He was considered quite a prodigy. He's young though, only a couple trillion years, so really just a kid by your standards. We gave him Earth, yes, we'll admit that. And perhaps it was a mistake. Your people were very primitive, and we felt he couldn't mess things up too badly, and we watched him very carefully to make sure things went smoothly. For a long time they did. No disrespect, but I wouldn't call what he did with the primes an act of kindness," Claire risked saying. King responded. "It was and it wasn't, I suppose. The tribe of humans that lived here then would be wiped out eventually anyway, much in the same fashion your dinosaurs were. Hyraaq preserved the primes in what would eventually become Delphia. Their gruesome nature, the cannibalism and such, was more of their own hearts acting out than any real influence from Tobit. I suppose they saw meat as meat, whether it came from man or beast. Hyraaq was actually lawful to Nod, not correcting them for that, but rather letting them form their own ways. We could not fault him for that." Pinkerton, though, isn't he one of your people? Derek asked, a bit of anger dancing on his lips. Thaddeus, one of us? Oh no, my son, he is just another mortal from Earth, like yourselves.
But he commanded Tobit, Soka spoke, and he ruled over Delphia. He spoke to the Council of Tobit. Easy, my child. Thaddeus here is nothing to fear. First of all, there is no Council of Tobit, only Nod. Thaddeus would call on Hyraaq for favors here and there, and then report back that there was some sort of greater tier, or power. In reality, the only Council of Tobit that ever existed was Thaddeus himself, Queen explained.
As for where Thaddeus Pinkerton came from, it was certainly not the heavens. He came to us from Louisiana. The year, as you know years, was 1699. He was a poor landowner who was trying to stake his claim, I suppose. He traveled with a man of some importance in your history named LaSalle. It was actually during a rare family vacation that myself, Queen, and Hyraaq met him.
Oh yes, he was a charmer. We appeared as humans, of course, wanting to blend in with you all. We decided to seek lodging, and the first place we found was a small house owned by your very own Thaddeus Pinkerton. He did invite us in. We paid him for the room, and he did in fact amaze us with his ability to speak. Such a charmer he was. He told us stories and we did laugh. Hyraaq liked him the most. He and Thaddeus bonded, I suppose. When it was time for us to leave the next day and continue with our journey, Hyraaq refused to go. He cried and begged for Mr. Pinky, as he called him, to come along with us. Honestly, as parents, we simply wanted to make our child happy. So we revealed ourselves to Thaddeus, a moment of foolishness, if there ever was. Of course, he agreed to come. He promised that he would do his best to guide and aid Hyraaq as he grew. We saw him as the perfect steward, a man Hyraaq loved, and who could guide him in ways of humanity.
That was our mistake, King interjected. The problem was, though, by the time we realized just how toxic Thaddeus was, we'd already stepped back. Our very own rules of Nod prevented us from just stepping in and undoing the damage that he was causing through Hyraaq. We did try and talk to Hyraaq a time or two, tell him that perhaps he was spending too much time with Thaddeus, but they were best friends, at least in Hyraaq's eyes, and there was no convincing him otherwise.
The only thing we could do at that point was wait. Simple as that. The rules of Nod are very specific, and even when Thaddeus convinced Hyraaq to reveal the red star, even that wasn't a direct violation of any of the Nod guidelines.
No, Thaddeus did not fully cross the line until he summoned Hyraaq here, to appear before you and commanded him to attack you. At that point he'd violated the Council of Nod, and we were free to intervene.
I am sorry,
Hyraaq Tobit whispered in a low and almost shy voice. Derek wanted to laugh if the situation weren't already so insane. Hyraaq, don't be sorry. It's your friend Mr. Pinky here who is to be sorry, and he shall be, King stated.
Pinkerton looked up from the snow. My lord, my lady, please forgive me. Please understand my intentions were always for Hyraaq. It was what you wanted me to do when you hired me on, to help him grow and...
Be silent, Thaddeus, King shouted, and raised his hand towards the portly man.
Please, don't hurt him, Hyraaq suddenly cried. See the problems of parenthood? You always have to put your children above all else, Queen said to Claire and Derek.
Very well, Hyraaq. We shall spare Thaddeus. We'll bring him back with us, and perhaps in time he can learn how to live as a man, instead of just a fool who thinks he's a god.
Oh, thank you, my lord and lady, thank you all, Pinkerton sobbed.
You can wait for us on the Red Star. We'll pick you up in a few days. A few of our days, King snapped. I'm sure there are quite a few people there who would love to see you again.
Pinkerton's eyes went wide with terror, and with a flick of King's wrist, he was snuffed from the earth in a small flash of red light. A real shame he was. I suppose now we'll have to find someone else to try and mentor Hyraaq in his role in humanity, Queen said softly. Soka stepped forward. I'll do it. Soka, no, Claire shouted. No, listen, Claire, she explained, language no longer a barrier between them. He needs a friend. I sense a goodness in him that just needs the right person to bring it out.
I can do that. He needs me.
Soka, you can't be serious. Stay with us, Derek exclaimed.
I have no family here. My parents were killed in Delphia. If I go back to Japan, I'll be forced to live with relatives that I barely know. I want to do this. Please. Please let me.
King and Queen looked at each other and nodded.
You are a brave little girl, Soka Ito. It is really your heart's desire to come home with Hyraaq? Queen asked. Yes, if he wants to be my friend.
Well, go and introduce yourself, King suggested.
Soka walked over to Tobit, no fear or hesitation. She extended her hand. I'm Soka, she said softly.
I am Hyraaq, replied Tobit.
Can I come home with you? I can show you lots of fun things, she said to him.
It won't be scary there. My castle is very nice, Tobit replied. Are you really going to let her do this? Derek asked the King and Queen. It's her heart's desire, so it seems. I can tell they are already bonding, King stated. And we will be there with them. We have learned our lesson about allowing one friend to have too much exposure with our son. However, with her, I sense that things will go much smoother.
Claire and Derek ran over to Soka. They hesitated for a moment at the sight of Tobit. He still bore too many bad memories for them to simply forgive so quickly.
Soka, you don't have to. You know that, right?
Claire said, tears falling down her face. Miss Claire, if I don't help him, then who will? Another Pinkerton? No, he needs a real friend, that's all, Soka answered. Claire hugged the girl hard, tears soaking into her hair. Don't be sad, Claire. I'll come and visit you in your dreams. You too, Mr. Derek. Derek knelt down and hugged her as well. He too was crying.
All right then. Looks like we are about settled here, King announced.
Queen approached Derek and Claire. You two are amazing humans. You are what many of our own kind should aspire to be. As for this whole mess that our son caused, we have taken the liberty of removing the red star from the sky. I think you'll find that in time, with its influence gone, that your people will return to normal. Humans heal quite remarkably that way.
Yes, oh yes you do, King announced. Now this is normally the part where we wave our hands so you two would wake up in your beds with no real memory of any of this. Perhaps in dreams, perhaps inspiration. You'd be surprised at how many of your great artists are just men and women whom we have made to forget. But that seems wrong to us. We shall not remove these memories. You have fought hard with your people today, and to take this away from you somehow seems like a sin. You both shall live long and incredible lives. That much we can promise you. Your journey is far from over. You will go on to accomplish feats beyond comprehension. After we leave, just wait here for a minute or so. Rescue is already on the way to get you, King informed them.
King, Queen, Tobit, and Soka stood together. Goodbye, Miss Claire. Goodbye, Mr. Derek. I love you both. I'll see you again one day, I promise, Soka called out. Tobit gave a single nod. He and Soka were holding hands.
Farewell, brave mortals. We shall be watching over you. You forever have our gratitude, King and Queen called in unison, and in the next moment they were gone.
One year later.
So that, folks, has been Derek Reynolds and Dr. Claire Nobles explaining their experience in what has become known as the Big Burst. Demonic cities, cults, and godlike beings. Really quite a tale, Jack Elder recapped from behind his desk as Claire and Derek sat across from him. The Big Burst had been the largest scale explosion ever recorded on Earth. It left a huge portion of Antarctica scorched, and even now, a year later, no snow will fall on the burnt ground. People felt the explosion all over the world, and the light that flew up into the sky could be seen from thousands of miles away. Its source had been one long mystery, and when Derek and Claire stepped forward, claiming to know its origins, Jack Elder had been quick to invite them on his show. "You don't believe us, do you?" Claire asked him. "Well, Dr. Nobles, I must admit, that's quite a story to take in." "Look at the proof, man. The red star vanished at the exact same time as the big burst in Antarctica, and you cannot deny what the satellite images showed in the moments before the big burst took place. You saw it, a city, outlined in white light. You could see buildings, streets, zoom in enough and you could almost see people. Derek argued back. Those are the facts, Mr. Reynolds, but I do believe that my audience, along with experts from around the globe, simply can't just blindly believe that this Delphia was some sort of hidden city, and that this Tobit was a godchild trying to learn right from wrong. Elder replied. If you went through what we did, there would never be a question, Claire replied. Well, anyway, we are out of time on Newsroom. I'd like to thank my guests, Derek Reynolds and Dr. Claire Nobles, for sharing their story. We'd like to hear your opinions too, folks, so feel free to email us here at Newsroom with your thoughts on the big burst and the blood star. For Newsroom, I am Jack Elder. Good night. Derek and Claire shook Elder's hand and left the studio. So, you're flying back to New Orleans tomorrow? Claire asked. Yeah, gotta get back to work, you know, he answered. Are you sure I can't convince you to stay a couple more nights? She asked him. Don't you have book signings all week? Derek responded, smiling. Yeah, who would have thought that the author of Applied Mythology would now be America's best-selling author? I would have. Trevor, Lena, we all knew how special you were from the start, Derek told her. They arrived at Claire's car and leaned on the hood. The stars are coming out, Claire said, smiling. Derek looked over at Claire Nobles. They'd become close over the last year, best friends perhaps. In that moment, looking at her underneath the stars with the New York City skyline behind them, he wanted very badly to kiss her. He thought she would let him. Perhaps they'd even wind up back in her hotel room. However, he didn't. In Derek's mind, Claire would always be Trevor's girl, a romance that never got to happen. Drive me to the airport? Derek asked. Sure, but let's sit here a little longer, Derek. Let's sit here and watch the stars. Maybe Soka is out there somewhere, looking back at us, Claire said, tears forming. Derek Reynolds put his arm around Claire Nobles, and the two sat under the stars together. Epilogue. Almost a decade later, under the same stars, way down south in New Orleans, a woman of perhaps her mid-30s sat on the river walk at the bank of the Mississippi. She wore a filthy black hooded sweatshirt and reeked of body odor. The last few years had been very difficult for her, living on the street, separated from all she had known. Tobit was gone, Tabitha was gone, Pinkerton was gone, and Delphia was gone. She had become a ship without a sail. She'd awoken in a shallow grave somewhere in the woods. Her last memories had been of her best friend literally stabbing her in the back. Her friend had meant to kill her, but she didn't know everything. Those Delphian herbs, the same ones she'd used after a certain British fuckboy had shot her in the stomach, had still been powerful in her bloodstream. Their healing effects had cured her of the stab wound, and her heart had begun to beat once more. What she first felt was a blessing, though, had turned out to be a curse. She was alone for the first time in her life. The gifts that Tobit had bestowed upon her were gone as well. She was now just another average slob in a sea of them. In her hand she clutched a knife. Not a lovely dagger of Tobit, nothing as special as that, but some piece of shit she'd stolen from another homeless person. She still didn't know what exactly went wrong, how those little fucks had done it, but she knew now more than ever that Derek and Claire, along with the Leary brothers, had succeeded in the very mission she'd been sent down to New Orleans to prevent. She had decided that tonight was to be her last on Earth. She didn't know what awaited someone like her on the other side, but she knew it had to beat sleeping on the streets and eating out of the trash 10 ways from Sunday. The knife, clutched in her hands, her soft wrists held out in anticipation. She closed her eyes and prepared to cut, when a voice suddenly spoke to her. "Lacey? Is that you?" She set the knife down and looked up in annoyance. Who would have had the nerve to stand between her and the fate the rest she knew felt she so deserved? "Who the fuck are you?" she asked without looking up. "Robert, you know. Bobby Mayonnaise?" the man replied. She looked up at him, and sure as hell, standing before Lacey Susino was the adult Robert Mayo, the very baby she'd once bludgeoned to death. "My God, Robert,"
You're all grown up, she replied. Lacey, I've searched for you my entire life. You did something to me. I've dreamed of you since I was a child. You opened my eyes.
Sorry, kiddo, that was Tabitha that woke you up. I was just the dumb bitch that beat your brains out. Are you here to kill me, Robert? Because I'd rather do that myself.
Tobit used to speak to me, Lacey. He told me that you were the one who brought me to him. Now he stopped speaking, but before he did, he told me where I could find you, Robert Mayo stated.
Yeah, sorry to tell you, but Tobit is gone. Poof. He just left, Lacey replied.
Then I give myself to you, he suddenly cried and fell to his knees before her.
I am so fucking confused right now, Lacey stated, looking at the man groveling on the filthy ground at her feet.
Lacey, there are others like me who Tobit has abandoned. We need you. We need you to lead us.
You don't say. I don't suppose you guys have a nice big house and a fancy car, something to help a girl like me off the streets, do you? She asked.
We will give you everything, Robert cried into the earth. Please do not abandon us as Tobit did.
A smile suddenly took over Lacey's face. She threw back the hood of her sweatshirt and stood up. She tapped Robert's forehead with her Doc Marten boots and ordered him to stand. So, Bobby Mayonnaise, tell me more about these friends of yours, she commanded.
Of course, they are ready to be led by you. They need your guidance, as I do, he replied.
Okay, let's go. My calendar just happens to be free, so let's see what you and these friends are all about, Lacey stated, and she and Robert began to walk towards his hotel.
Hail Tobit! Robert suddenly shouted.
No, that won't do at all, Lacey corrected him. Tobit left, remember? Let's try Hail Lacey.
Hail Lacey!
Robert screamed, and Lacey Suzino found that she could get used to this. She found that it fit her perfectly.
Lacey, I was so afraid I'd never see you again, he told her as they walked. I thought it was over.
Lacey smiled. Nothing is ever really over, now is it, Robert? Why, I believe there's more to come, even after most people like to believe it's the end.